um, joining us on Zoom or in person. We're really happy to be hosting you all at the DCC. My name's Sin Macias Gomez. I use he, they pronouns. I'm a recent grad from UC Berkeley and have been involved with the work of the DCC throughout most of my time in undergrad, I'd say. I'm really happy to be co-moderating today with Ryan. I'll pass it over to you.
My name is Ryan Enriquez. I also use he, they pronouns. I'm a second-year Master of Public Policy candidate at UC Berkeley's Goldman School of Public Policy. I've also been involved in disability justice advocacy back to my time as an undergrad at UC Davis, but now here at UC Berkeley ever since I started in summer of 23. So it's just been a privilege to be in this space, in particular, the Disability Cultural Center, the only one in the entire UC system. I'm trying to get that changed and expanded soon. But it's been just an utmost privilege to be with some amazing community members, and I'm so excited to have this conversation with everyone today as well.
So, jumping right into things, we're gonna introduce some of our panelists that we have today. And I don't know if we're gonna be showing it too.
No, these are just slides.
Yeah. Okay. Let me get it up too. Sorry, folks.
Panelists unfortunately could not make it here today due to some unforeseen circumstances, but Dr. Victor Pineda is the Executive Director for the Center for Independent Living. As we know, the Center for Independent Living has really been a bedrock and cornerstone of disability rights and advocacy here in the East Bay, being the first nonprofit focused on independent living for disabled adults and really in the entire country. So their mission is to serve disabled people across the East Bay. Can I go to the next slide, please? And really just empower everyone from independent living to transportation and so many other areas of living with a disability throughout the East Bay and really creating access for all. Next slide, please. Our next panelist is Nicole Bond, Executive Director of the DREDF, the Disability Rights Education Defense Fund, who are really leading the way on so many legal fronts to support disabled people in their civil rights and missions across the entire country, from defending 504, also defending students in higher education. I'm really privileged to have you on the panel here today and representing your organization as well, too.
Thank you. I'll be introducing Eric. Eric is joining us from Senior and Disability Action, which mobilizes and educates seniors and people with disabilities to fight for individual rights and social justice through individual support and collective action. We work together, or folks at Senior and Disability Action work together to create a city and world where seniors and people with disabilities can live well and safely. And we also have Carmen joining us, so hopefully, there we go. Carmen is joining us from UC Berkeley's Disabled Student Program, which promotes an inclusive environment for students with disabilities as they equip with appropriate accommodations and services to achieve their individual and academic goals. They're dedicated to supporting disabled students and collaborating with the campus community to remove barriers to access and embrace the university's values of equity and inclusion. Folks at DSP believe that an accessible environment universally benefits everyone. And I realize I didn't talk much about the folks themselves, but the spaces that they work in. So just to take a second and recognize both the work that Eric and Carmen have done in the past, I think it would be really nice to highlight. Eric is a genderqueer and pronoun flexible person that has lived in the Bay Area since 2007, and they've been deeply involved in community events and development work and strategic visioning, including San Francisco's Gay Men Chorus, Silicon Valley Gay Men Chorus, the Bears of San Francisco, and Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. And she has a BA in English and an MA in English education from Michigan State, and an MA and PhD in education from UC Santa Cruz. Yeah, they're stuck in traffic right now, which is also an important note. After these intros, I'll do a bit of an access and grounding so we can see if there's any other needs, such as joining from Zoom or other things folks might need. Carmen is a seasoned disability and civil rights practitioner with over 30 years of experience in Texas and California, focused on advancing racial and economic justice for people with disabilities and communities of color. She is trilingual in English, Spanish, and American Sign Language, and has worked as an ASL interpreter for deaf victims of human trafficking from Mexico and South America, deepening her commitment to cross-cultural and linguistic access. Carmen holds a doctorate in organizational change and leadership from University of Southern California, and a master's in assistive technology studies and human services from CSU Northridge. Her current research explores the intersections of disability and race in U.S. higher education and best disability practices. With that being said, thank you folks for joining us in various capacities. Important thing to note too, although folks from the Center for Independent Living weren't able to join us, they're still totally accessible and reachable, and we'll be sure to share contacts afterwards as well. Oh, totally. I'll pass it over to Victor for a second, or sorry. Yeah, Victor for a second to go ahead and share. Oh, gotcha. So I'll keep an eye on Zoom and do a bit of grounding for us while we wait for Victor to type something for us to read out. Starting on just kind of how we're all coming into the space and why we're really here to share today's panel and conversation is recognizing the moment that we're in. Really, the fact of the matter is that there are very real threats to our safety as a community of disabled folks in the United States in this moment. We're going to be talking about some of the threats or ways we keep each other safe in this moment that is obviously going to be an ongoing conversation, considering the Trump administration and the other various threats that we're seeing to institutions themselves and funding at large. So one of the big things that I really wanted to offer and why I said yes to this opportunity to facilitate the conversation was that there's so many ways that we're taking care of each other as a community in this moment. And iteratively that I've seen since coming to Berkeley, our city is super unique in our role in the larger disability movement historically, but also in this moment, holding space for conversations like these where we uplift the ways that we're actively fighting back and actively taking care of one another is something that I really strive for as a longtime advocate in the community and really for anti-oppressive work at large. So for me, I think this conversation is going to be really powerful, and I'm really hoping that we offer a bit of solace in the moment. I think one of the things that I've really been reckoning with is that we're experiencing a pretty monumental amount of grief in this moment that doesn't really get recognized, whether it's the loss of stability or a sense of normalcy or the world that we felt like we had at one point before the moment that we feel like we're in. And I think that that's just really powerful for us to reckon with. Conversations like these help us move that grief through our body and feel like we can actually take action versus, a stress response motivating our actions. That's obviously always really helpful. But how do we build sustainable work in community care? That's hopefully going to be the goal of the conversation today, with the underlying strategies that we're really taking on in this moment. A bit of access things too. Folks might already know on Zoom we have closed captioning available that you can access on the bottom section of the screen. Folks on Zoom can also already see that we have a pinned interpreter who's providing ASL interpretation. And folks might have already also noticed that we're recording on Zoom or have the camera set up in the space. And we will be having this as an archival resource for folks if they want to reflect back or share it out to the community for folks who weren't able to join us in this moment. So I hope, thank you all for letting me kind of take that space to set the tone of our conversation. I think we've sectioned out our questions in a couple of ways. Firstly, starting out with just introductions. And I'll pass it to Ryan to lead us in the first question.
Thank you so much. And moving to our introduction slide, each of you represent organizations that play such a unique role in representing and supporting disabled people at large in the East Bay and around the country. Could you maybe speak to the mission of your organization and the work that you do to impact larger efforts towards disability justice in the East Bay and beyond? We can start with you, Nicole, or if you want.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Bott, and I am the Executive Director of Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund. I've been the Executive Director since June of 2024. So as with our panelists, new in role and very excited to be here today. Really great to meet in the DCC space. This is my first time here, so thank you for the invitation. It's a very nice space. Just a little bit about me. I've been, prior to joining DREDF, I worked in higher education for 20 years, working primarily in student and faculty disability services programs. And then I worked for 8 years as the overall ADA coordinator for San Francisco. And now I'm here with the privilege of leading DREDF. And a little bit about DREDF. We really work to protect the civil rights of all persons by protecting civil rights of people with disabilities and all people. We do this in a variety of ways. We do policy advocacy. We do advocacy in education spaces and with parents and families. And then we do legal advocacy and also some litigation. We also will write occasionally what's called an amicus brief, which is a friend of the court document that helps our legislators understand the positions of how they are about to vote or choose and how their decision would impact disabled people. And we have a really robust website that I'll continually reference through this conversation at dredf.org, DRED.org. So really encourage you to use that. In terms of some very recent things we're doing right now, I'll be talking about some of them related to Medicaid, etc. We just filed a case that will, we hope, impact students especially. We filed a case against UCLA for access barriers. That information is now posted on our website. We've also recently settled with Kaiser on a communication access litigation and have some recent amicus briefs up as well. And I'll leave it there for now. And welcome, Eric.
Apologies, there was a fire on the bridge and all the lanes shut down, so it took me an hour and a half to get here. So quite an experience. Always fun with the Bay Bridge.
I'm sorry to hear that. I'm very glad you're here. Yeah. That's where I'll pause for now.
Carmen or Eric, if you'd like to speak on this question. Yeah.
I could go next. So
cool.
My name's Carmen Varela, and I'm the Executive Director of the Disabled Students Program and the Disability Culture and Community Center. And I just want to welcome everybody and thank everybody for being here today in this space and for sharing in this conversation with us. So I lead a department on campus that serves students with disabilities. So it's twofold, right? So we have the Disabled Students Program, or what we call DSP, which is charged with ensuring equal access for students with disabilities within the academic space. And then we also have the Disability Cultural and Community Center, which does the beyond compliance work, which is where we're hosting this event today. So some of the things that we're doing at DSP is we're moving from compliance to justice and moving beyond legal compliance to drive institutional transformation. So we're centering access as a civil and human right rather than a checklist. Some of that work is reshaping systems to advocate for policy and practices that view accessibility as foundational. And so I'll give you an example of that. At UC Berkeley, we have what we call the shared model when it comes to testing, which is very unique to Berkeley. I don't believe I want to believe that none of the other UCs have the same model, where faculty actually take on the responsibility and share the institutional responsibility of access by doing some of that proctoring for our students with disabilities. And so because we are looking at accessibility as an institutional responsibility, not just one that belongs to one department, we're able to share in that responsibility with our faculty partners on campus. Another way that we do that is our teams work individually and in concert to provide access within the classroom or within the learning space. So oftentimes what that means is we have different teams. We have specialists engaging in the interactive process with our students. We have our communications team providing access for students with communication needs. We have alternative media. We have our proctoring unit. We have a bunch of different programs working together. We have our TRIO, SSSD, which is specific for students with disabilities that provide an enhanced set of services and support to students. We have this space here, the DCC, which does some really incredible work that is just as important as the academic work that happens or the work that DSP does in the academic space, which is helping students find their voice, their identity, and really looking and modeling what it is to be a self-advocate, what people with disabilities contribute to society at large, and really raising that value around the contributions of people with disabilities. Just a couple of quick other things that we do also is looking at disability as identity and not just a diagnosis, and really approaching disability through a cultural and intersectional lens, really understanding that all of our students come from a variety of intersections, whether it's LGBTQ, first generation, students of color, what have you. And our practice and our work reflects that complexity. So we really work towards moving that needle closer to inclusive excellence, sort of holistic and equity-based practices. And then I'll pass it on to Eric.
Great. Well, thanks. Apologies again for my tardiness. Dr. Eric Greenfrost, genderqueer, any all pronouns, and I am the new Executive Director of Senior and Disability Action. As a visual description, I am a 6-foot-tall person with a beard and a buzzed head, wearing black pants and a fabulous peacock shirt in teal today with some stunning matching dangly green earrings and nail polish. I am really excited to be part of Senior and Disability Action. I think one of the things that's unique about us that I'll talk more about later is that we aren't a direct service organization, and we aren't necessarily a direct advocacy organization, perhaps in the way that DREDF is, but instead our mission is really to organize and to empower our communities, seniors and people with disabilities, to get involved in their own advocacy, to get involved in the issues that they're interested in, and to be connected. And so along with having sort of a unique position with that as well, we also are both an organization for people with disabilities and for seniors. Not something I think people inherently assume that goes together, but has so much overlap, which I'll also talk about later. And so some of the issues that we've been focused on, both for a number of decades prior to being Senior and Disability Action, there were two organizations, the Senior Action Network and Planning for Elders in the Central City, who merged. And so for a number of decades, we've had folks working on issues around housing, around healthcare and home care, and then around public health in particular. Mass for Equity is a group that we have that has been going for a number of years. And then transit is something that has always been a passion of ours and has been something that we've been really focusing on lately. We just launched our Muni Now, Muni Forever campaign to not only fight the cuts to public transportation, but also have a vision of growth, right? What would it look like to actually be in a economy of abundance rather than a scarcity economy, the way that we think about public resources. So yeah, I think I'll pause there for now and just say it's such a pleasure and thank you to UC Berkeley and the DCC for inviting us all here.
Thank you so much, everyone. I love that, thinking about our resources with that frame of abundance. I think that's a really powerful way to frame it. And our next question is, all of you are relatively new to your positions in some capacity, but have been leaders in advocacy for a while. What have you learned during this time, and what expertise or personal experience have you brought to inform this advocacy work that you all are doing now? And no particular order, whoever feels called to answer first, feel free.
I'll go. This is Nicole speaking. And I failed to give a visual description of myself, so I'd like to do that. I am a white woman. I am a wheelchair user, and I have a black outfit with some sparkles on today and glasses. And so I think for me, what I've learned or what I knew and has been reinforced, which will be obvious to everyone listening and here, is that you really, when you're leading disability rights organizations and doing this work, you really need to be able to be responsive and to go with the flow, because things are changing and we need to respond at the pace that things are changing. And I think that one of the things that has been really important to me, coming from a background of both working in higher ed and directly in public service, is that I really want to make sure that we are coming together in spaces like this and hearing about the direct concerns of the communities. And I think you framed it so well when you were talking about grieving and all of the uncertainty that's happening right now, and using experiences like this to reframe how we look at our future. And there is a lot that people are afraid of, but when we come together in a community like this, we have an opportunity to talk through it. Also, though, I want to lift up that we need the things that I'm becoming to understand more and more every day, is that it's important not only to address those things that are the hardest things, but then how can we also think about disability culture, disability justice, that also uplifts the joy of disability, which I think is not spoken of enough. And so as we're making our choices about what we're focusing on, one of the things that I really hope that we to do is think through that balance as we're choosing our efforts.
That inspires me. So maybe I'll hop in. I was just thinking about joy as well. Thinking about getting ready for this panel and with all the terrible awfulness that's happening in the world, drawing, of course, from the Black Joy movement, which I think we want to honor. Really, I think the strides and the model that's been set there of what we want to live for ourselves and present to the world. And if all we ever talk about is tragedy, that becomes your narrative, that becomes your story, right? So you have to make sure you're including joy as part of it. I know that as well. To then answer the question is, a lot of my work has been in social justice spaces, but primarily queer spaces. And so of course, queer joy being such a radical act of rebellion, of existence, and really leaning into that. So I've had to learn a lot about the disability rights and disability justice movements. And for that, I think the question sort of specifically being a leader, what I've really been reflecting on is when leadership means being able to have the privilege to take a stand, to have a vision, to be in the forefront, and then when to know when to step aside and step back and support everyone else. And I'm so lucky that I have such a talented team, as well as our membership. You know, SDA is really based on a membership model, and having so many amazing, passionate folks who are part of both our staff and our members who have been doing this work for years, and knowing when, for me, to say, okay, I understand social justice, I've been involved in this, don't understand disability justice perhaps as much. Please educate me, please let me know what it is that I should be focusing on, what it is that you need my support on, and then especially right within this time where everything seems to be moving so quick, where everything seems so terrible, what pieces can we find, what grounding can we find, what joy can we find, and be able to help direct the energy for folks. People are looking for an outlet in a lot of cases, right? They're looking for a way to be involved, for a way to be connected. How can we help provide that to them? Thank you.
I'm gonna also go back, and I didn't do a visual description, so I'm gonna do that well. I'm gonna say I'm not half as fabulous as Eric, but I am wearing a light blue blouse. I'm a Latina, I have shoulder length hair, and I'm wearing glasses and pink lipstick. And I use she, her, and am pronouns. So I think for me, I feel like I'm still learning. There seems to be such a difference for me between Northern California and Southern California. I've been here for 1.5 years. And I think what I've learned about being in the East Bay is that this is really a community of care, right? That there's so much around belonging and a community of care, which really inspires me and really makes me, I guess, see the work through a different lens. Not that other places like Southern California, other places in the country don't do that, but I think Northern California and the East Bay is a very special place, I think, in that regard. I'm gonna say that I think what I've learned is that institutional barriers exist, whether it's at a public leading university, that's number one, or whether you're down at the bottom of the list, whatever number you're at a university, it doesn't matter. Students' needs are students' needs. Our obligations are our obligations and legal responsibilities to students to ensure equal access, and that there are barriers and gaps within the system and the institution that create barriers for student success. And so I believe that it is my deep responsibility and a high responsibility to lead a team that helps to break down those barriers in different ways, whether it's in the academic setting, whether it's in a social setting and students who are trying to find their identity, and it's supporting teams to be able to do that work. And I believe that accountability and transparency are very important in this work when it comes to making change. And I think also thinking of education as not just exclusive to some people, but really looking at it as a right for every single person, right? Whether it's in K through 12, whether it's in higher education, whether it's in some type of a vocational type of program, but everybody has the right or should have the right to be able to access education equally. And we know that that is not the truth in our communities for children with disabilities, adults with disabilities. And so we are working really hard to make that promise a reality for our students here at UC Berkeley. Yeah, that's what I'll say about that.
No,
Thank you.
It's well said. And really, I think like the sentiments of leaning into the community, leaning into your teams about like what to learn, right? What do you need to know in the areas of, you know, community care, law, higher education to support our communities. I mean, I know all of you don't do this alone. I know executive director is the title, but you have a full team behind you. I'm interested to learn, you know, what have you learned from your people and your organizations during this time of essential advocacy where we really need to be staffed and ready to defend kind of disability rights across all of our different sectors. What has been some things that you've learned from your team about how to combat all of these threats?
I can go. So it's interesting. I was having this conversation with my teams because it's been a very difficult time for a lot of people in our community. And our teams are diligently working every day. They're showing up, they're doing the work, but it's becoming increasingly difficult. There's a lot of worry, there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of anxiety about what is the next thing that is gonna happen. And so I think what's really important is for us to really kind of get back to the core and to our why of why we're doing this work and why it's so important. And I think for me, what I can say in terms of the why is that the work that we do is so essential and critical because we are not just providing access to education, but we are providing opportunities for employment for students with disabilities when they leave Berkeley. We're providing them with degrees that can move them into some really great graduate programs, PhD programs. Our work really serves to close the gap around poverty and unemployment for people with disabilities. And we know that education is key to employment, and that's why this work is so critical and important. So we know that there's progress being made, but there still remains a lot of work to be done. And I just wanna really give a shout out to all my teams for being so stellar. I wanna thank the DCC, they're doing amazing work every day with our students and our teams at DSP, really listening and doing equity-minded work and being equity-minded practitioners, looking at students holistically. And I believe that that's also very key, right? Students and human beings are multidimensional, and we cannot just see them as one thing, right? You are not just a person with a disability. You are a female with a disability. You might be a queer person with a disability. You might be a person with varying intersections. And how does that impact you within the learning space? And so we listen, we pay attention, and then we provide the services and supports that students need. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
For it, or?
I'll go.
Okay.
We can Rochambeau next time. So for me, everything that Carmen said, and also really understanding, as I mentioned in the beginning, DRADF has a wonderful team, and there are different areas that we work on. We work on education, parent-child advocacy, like I mentioned, policy work, legal work. I think one of the things that we've really been talking about lately that is important right now, it's always been important, but it's especially important now, is really looking at who's included and who isn't. There aren't boundaries to disability justice and what impacts disabled people, as we all know. What impacts the disability community impacts also communities of color, trans and non-binary folks, gender non-conforming folks, and many of whom have disabilities, many of whom do not. It doesn't matter. We are all one community, and we need to be thinking about that as we're building our alliances and getting the work done. In doing that, we become trusted messengers for the work. And I think for me, really building that trust and building upon the legacy of DRADF is important, where we also work through a variety of grants and other things, and we are a trusted messenger network, for instance, for a state program to help educate folks with disabilities on emergency planning and heat and water and all of this, above and beyond everything else that we're doing. Really understanding that people see our organizations and trust our organizations and our work, and we really want to continue to do that, but we need everybody at the table, and we need to hear everybody's voices.
I love the theme of education that keeps coming up, and that's one of the things that drew me for sure to Senior and Disability Action is the strong education component we have as well, both with our individual Crackle program, our consumer rights and community living program, as well as a variety of services we go out to the communities and do. As many of you, I am a survivor of graduate school, so I don't think it's a coincidence so many of us have that doctor title. So I always love learning. I'm a lifelong learner. And so for this question, I think for me, it's been both very direct education. Just in the ride over here with my coworker, I got a bit of a crash course on SSI versus SSDI, which I thought I understood, but I maybe did not. And of course, these are the complexities we're living in right now. The systems that we're in are so nuanced and various, and the different needs folks have and where they have to go, and especially in the Bay Area, we are a resource-rich area. We have so many millionaires. We have all these, tech companies. Resources are there, but they're in various places, and you almost need a PhD just to know how to even navigate them all. So along with the direct education, I really have been learning a lot from my team about those institutions and about the lived experiences of the folks that they've been working with. And I think that's what's so key. And I know all of you have talked about this as well, but really listening and learning from the work that they've done and from the people that they've been working with and learning from, and being able to take that in, digest it, and then say, okay, how can I support you as an executive director, right? What is the next step? How can I help with whatever visioning we need, or if there's a strategy that we have to put together, and then really trusting them with that implementation, right? With that execution, and really making sure that you are trusting your team. And then in my case as well, of course, trusting with the members, trusting with the folks who are involved with these different groups and committees that we have, to know what it is that they want to advocate for and what they want us to focus on.
I would say listening and learning are so critical into informing change. We'll also add, I'm going to need some of your wisdom as I wrap up my grad program this semester. So we'll be calling on you for that. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you all so much. Kind of the next couple of questions are a little bit more focused in on respective parts of y'all's work, and also kind of not like bridging all of the knowledge building that we're doing with our teams or bringing into the work itself. The next step is mobilizing and responding to the kind of current landscape that we're in, and how that's shaping folks' respective work. And kind of to start out with a question for Carmen, actually, focusing on education specifically, how has UC Berkeley's DSP, and by extension too, the work of DCC, ensured accessible education and services for disabled students? And expanding a little bit more on what we envision as the future of disability inclusive education here at the institution. I know we talked a little bit about it, but if there's anything else you'd like to add, for sure.
Sure. So I think here at UC Berkeley, we're looking at being proactive and not reactive when it comes to accessibility and action, right? So here at UCB, we're moving from retrofitting access to designing for inclusion. And so, we still have a lot of work to do, but that is the direction which we're going in. And so we collaborate with faculty, instructional designers, campus partners, administrators to ensure that accessibility is built in for the learning environment, from digital course materials to real-time communication and access, which we provide in the classroom for students. We also provide high-touch and high-impact services. That's another way that we affect change. So we support over 6,000 students here at UC Berkeley. And we, every student who comes into our office, we meet with every single student. We are intentional in the way that we provide services. We do a holistic approach and assessment around needs, figuring out what accessibility looks like for students, and then also working creatively with faculty to make sure that accommodations are in place for students. And that can be, accommodations. I think sometimes folks think of there's a list of accommodations, but it's really about how creative we can get to provide access. And that's what we work towards doing, and really looking at assistive technology and innovation. For example, in the classroom, we use things like Glean or Otter AI or what have you for note-taking. There's oftentimes been a lot of pushback by faculty about the use of this, but it's very clear, right? The ADA trumps any policy on campus around fears around using recordings or using any kinds of technology when it comes to an accommodation. And it's really up to us to really push back and have those conversations with faculty and administration, and engage in discourse that really challenges assumptions around ability and the use of tools for access. And so that's one of the things we're doing here at Berkeley. And then really, we're really working hard. I think for me, in my very short tenure and in this year, one of my big goals is really to work on faculty partnerships and collaborations. Now that I'm beginning to learn the landscape of UCB a little bit better, we have a really great model where we have 2 disability liaisons or faculty liaisons on campus. And so when things get a little a little hairy with faculty, we asked them to step in. We just did that today with Justin, and he did an amazing job, right? To kind of help faculty is from a peer-to-peer perspective, so faculty understand what their obligations are, what their rights are when they don't agree. There's a process that's already codified when there's a disagreement with an accommodation, and then we go through that process together. So yeah, those are some of the things that we're doing here at UCB.
Future ahead for DSP and really education at large here at UC Berkeley for disabled students. But now I'd like to turn to you, Eric, and really considering your organization's approach to an active lens of community care, I'm interested in how do you envision your organization's work in the years to come, given our current landscape?
Yeah, absolutely. First, I'm going to address the beginning of this, the community part of it, and one of the things that I really love about STA and I've heard from folks. First of all, is that we all are just future seniors, and then seniors in training, and then finally we get to that goal of seniors, if we are so lucky, right? And so all of us hopefully will be lucky enough to reach the age of senior and being an elder. And likewise, I think a lot with disabilities, we frame it as people with disabilities. I like thinking about you have people and then those who are temporarily abled in different ways, right? So yeah, I'm seeing some handshakes, some applause out there. Thank you. And I think that's where the overlap really connects, right? Is that instead of envisioning yourself as not part of that community, we all, if we are so lucky, will age, right? And if nothing else from that, will not be as temporarily abled as we are. And so really thinking about that has been important for our organization, about then that overlap and that intersection between these various communities, between all the many different varieties of people with disabilities, of communities, of folks with disabilities. And so then how do we take that, and as I had kind of mentioned earlier, when we're living in this landscape of nonstop onslaught, right? How do we not live in terror, in fear? And it's not that these dangers aren't real, right? And these are things that are important and that we do have to be paying attention to and we do have to be resisting. But how do we find those spaces for care, which I know we've all talked about? How do we find those spaces for joy? And one of the things that we're really thinking about is how do we do base building, right, as an organizing strategy? How do we not just be reactive, right? How do we be proactive in the way that we're envisioning not just the work we're doing now, but the work that we want to do for the future? And how are we putting into place those sorts of connections, that sort of community building where, yes, right now we should be angry and we should be out there and we should be resisting and fighting, but then also how are we celebrating, how are we caring, how are we loving, and how do we then build that into a future where we're not just being reactive to the awfulness that's being thrown at us, but that we're building the vision of what we do want, right? That we are creating those sorts of communities that will then develop and hold power. And how do we make sure, and this is something I've heard from a couple of my team members, of when this is all over, that we don't just give all our power away, right? That we've done all this work, we've connected, we've had these amazing actions and rallies and meetings and brainstorming, and then we get to a moment of at least a little bit of relief, and we sort of like just hand that power away. How do we keep building towards having those folks and those voices be the ones that shape the future, which of course connects so much to our education work? How are we doing that? Yeah, thanks.
That's a really great response. I think it makes a lot of sense to really be holding both, responding to the current moment that we're in and building a future at the same time. I think that's how we actually build up some of the resiliency and stamina for the goals that we need to have more long-term than just our current moment. But acknowledging that, a question for Nicole is really in response to the attacks that we've seen on 504 from attorney generals across the country. And as we know, 504 is pretty much the bedrock of accessibility in the country. So really essential work on the legal front happening at DREDF. And we're curious to hear more about how we're fighting back against those attacks.
Thank you for that. I want to first direct folks to dredf.org/protect-504. The most current updates are going to be there, but I can talk with you about where we are today. As some of you may know, there is litigation in the works that is primarily putting at threat our ability to remain as disabled people integrated in community services. This is still the case of the active lawsuit called Texas v. Becerra. We got a little bit of good news on Friday where the unconstitutionality argument of 504 was dropped. So that is very good news. But there is still a lot of work to do. So we're still encouraging folks to contact their attorney general, especially if you're living in one of the 17 states that is named in the litigation. That list is on DREDF's website, and you can look there or find it under our issues and initiatives menu and really respond and ask your attorney generals to reject this act. And the biggest thing that we can do today on that, and on really anything, I think, that is threatening to the rights of folks with disabilities, the rights of people in general, is to come together and continue to tell our lawmakers what the impact is. We have to continue to share our stories. That theme will come up again, I'm sure, in the course of this conversation. But please do engage and look at the resources and follow the resources. DREDF is one place. There are other places. Engage, take action, respond. We are seeing it work in certain arenas, like in the Protect Medicaid space, where people are sharing their stories and their legislators are hearing these stories and really thinking through some of these threats, some of these potential cuts. But we're not out of the woods. We really have a lot more work to do. People need to continue to come together. That's what I'll highlight for now.
No, thank you for sharing that. And the work that you're doing to protect 504 and so many other social institutions across the country are certainly meaningful to so many people among our community. And I was wondering if each of you here today could maybe speak to your organization's role in supporting really the uncertain future for social safety net programs and disability resources as a whole. I know our community members are scared about what's happening in Social Security, scared about what's happening to Medicare and Medicaid across the country. How is each of your organizations working on those fronts, and maybe what can the audience do as well?
What I'll say is I think here at UCB, we're looking at it as a moral imperative and not just a mission. And as a public leading university, we have a responsibility to model what that care looks like for our community and for our students, especially in this time where everything seems to be in flux. And things are so uncertain when it comes to budgets, when it comes to services, when it comes to funding, that our role isn't just academic, it's moral. I think the second point I'll make is that at UCB acts as a local safety net within a fractured one. So we're seeing cuts to Medicaid, cuts to Medicare, not access to funding, right? Cuts to access to funding. And so when federal and state systems begin to falter, institutions like Berkeley then become that safety net for people and specifically for the students who are here. For example, we have the Disabled Students Program, we have the DCC, we have our Basic Needs Program, we have our University Health Services, right, that provide physical and mental health services for students. We have student-led mutual aid efforts that work together to fill those gaps and really providing the things that students need for academic success, right? Even just the basic things, housing, food, mental health services, and cultural care. I think the last point I'll make is centering collective, not transactional care. right? And I think that's what I described right now is the community care that Berkeley is really all about, and that has really been one of my big lessons coming here to the East Bay. It's about relationships, it's about collective care, it's about dismantling the structures that isolate disabled people and create barriers, more barriers for people with disabilities to access education and needed resources. And I really believe that our future depends on building these networks and fostering those relationships with our community partners.
I'll hop in on that one because so many themes we keep hearing repeated, right? Education, care. I think a lot of what SDA is doing is trying to find the places to direct our community members to the organizations, and then also thinking about that. What safety nets can we provide when some of these other ones are taken away? In some cases that is on the individual level. Just last week, I was in the office when one of our staff members sat down with a community member who had come in, dropped into the office, and they called and were helping ask the questions. This person had a language barrier and they asked the questions about why their co-pays on their prescriptions had gone up when their SSI income had not, like what had happened. And this conversation that without that support, this community member just was not going to be able to navigate the system. They had to call more than one office, and to have someone just be able to be there and help support them as they were navigating that system was so important. And then also institutionally, though, a lot of what we're doing is pushing, especially again here in San Francisco, very resource rich. We're privileged. We're privileged to be in California. We're privileged to be here in the Bay Area. What are our lawmakers doing? What are our representatives doing to help protect our communities in perhaps the absence of federal funding? What extra safety nets are we creating? Just the way that Berkeley, then becomes that fallback. How can we make sure that our cities and our counties are preparing for this and helping to provide a little bit more certainty, right? At least hopefully a little bit more security of what we can for both the immediate need, but then yes, also thinking about the future and what are we building together? What are we working with to be able to be connected as we go forward? And then, and these ideas too, you mentioned mutual aid. That's something that I was just here in the East Bay. We were at a coalition meeting and much in the way that we had these mutual aid pods develop at the beginning of the pandemic, there's a group that's bringing some of that back, but much more politically focused now. And it's not just about getting groceries for each other or checking in, which of course is still important, right? That individual care, that sustenance is still important, that survival. But then how do we also go to success? How do we go to abundance and to growth? And thinking about these folks who are now looking, people who we may not have considered part of the senior or disability community, but now they are looking and they're ready to go fight for Medicaid and Medicare, Medi-Cal, right? Like they are ready to go fight for transit. And how do we get them plugged in? How do we start to build that system using some of these models that maybe hadn't initially been designed for that, but that fit so well into building that community?
I would add to that, in addition to the community care, it made me think about, in addition to all the actions that we really do need to be taking and all the opportunities that we have to say something, we also need to be taking care of each other. DREDF has we call it the weekly exhale, where those who would like to come together and we just check in about how we're doing, because there's so much that's happening all the time. And towards that, one of the things that's important for DREDF, and I know is important for all of us in the CIL as well. I know Victor can't be here in person, but I just wanted to highlight we're really trying collectively between DREDF and the CIL in particular to find ways to continue to actually physically bring the community together for events where we can be either virtually or in person or hybrid in the spaces and talking about these things. So events like this, we had a very successful film screening of the PBS documentary Change Not Charity, which is about the history of the disability rights movement. It's on the American Experience. It's pretty fantastic. Take a listen or a look if you haven't already. But one of the things that really struck me out of that experience is people are really hungry. People with disabilities are very hungry to come together and to just come together in frustration, in joy, in grief, in action. And we need to continue as leaders, I think, to facilitate those spaces as much as we can.
And I mean, we've seen it across the country as well as our community, just the ability to show up, right? And our community wanting to show up and show out is just so important. I remember, Carmen, we were speaking about this earlier, just like that's half the battle, is just showing up, and how critical that is, especially in times like these.
Yeah. And some of the things that stood out to me too, and what you all were saying, and the next kind of sequence of questions that we have, is this aspect of mutual aid is not something new to our community. And we're really thinking about it in revolutionary ways that expand towards self-sufficiency, self-sustainability. In worst case scenarios, we're feeling like the pressure is on to figure things out, but nonetheless, we're doing things like weekly exhales that I think are really powerful, and more institutions should be having, because the reality is we're engaged in hard work, and it definitely feels like an uphill battle in this moment. But these aspects of care and building abundance when the narrative of scarcity is so big and real to our community. The next section we're really looking at is creating the future that we need, and the critical work in mobilizing the energy that is in our face from our community, saying, hey, we're ready for something. We're ready for a real determining of our future. And the question that we really have in that spirit, and I know we're talking about it already, so if there's anything you feel like you wanted to elaborate on, open for everyone, if you could share a vision of your vision of what disability justice looks like here in the Bay Area, and really thinking beyond that, what does it look like for the country too?
Hop in first this time, and then say, you know, when I think about in particular politics, right, and the politics that we're living in, it's not a mistake that we talk about the political machine, right? And often the advocacy and organizing around politics can feel like that, right? You feel like a cog in a machine, right? We're plugging folks in, we're just continuing to churn things out, and that's wearing down. And that's why I love this mutual aid concept of how do we build relationships? How do we build communities that are both going to sustain us right now, give us a place to have an exhale, give us a place of, you know, both respite and sustenance, but then also reinvigorate, right, and allow us to get back out there. And how does that then grow, right, to the Bay Area and beyond? And I think it really is that model of starting small and locally, right? Find the folks who are in your space, be that folks in your neighborhood, folks in your block, folks who are at your community center, your CIL, but then build from that, right? And so have that, but then be able to be part of a larger movement, to be part of a larger picture. And I think we're seeing some of that with like, you know, the hands-off actions that just happened that were across the country. And so while to some degree it was localized, right, we were here in the Bay Area having, you know, individual actions, but it was part of a bigger movement. And my hope is that we don't lose that energy, right? That it's not a one-time thing, that it's not the, okay, we picked this one date and we all happen to show up on the streets, but it's more of how do we stay connected? How do we continue to share resources, share communication, share vision, and be able to then take what's working on an individual or a local level and help broaden that. And maybe it doesn't fit the same way in every single neighborhood, but the fact that we all can communicate about it, the fact that we can talk about strategy, we can talk about visioning, I think that's going to be key, right, is really that interconnectedness.
I think for me, in addition to all of that, I don't think that we can begin to achieve real disability justice without first acknowledging the places where, even in these difficult times, we have privilege. I am a lifelong disabled person. I also acknowledge that I am a white woman. And we still do not have representation in the way that we really need it at the leadership level. And so I think in addition to everything Eric said, we need to continue to foster disability identity and interest and desire in these topics and in being advocates and in being leaders and creating opportunities to empower folks that do not have access to the same privilege to do so. I think that's the challenge that really is on each of us.
So I think for UCB and DSP and the way that my kind of vision is, there's a lot of talk about collaboration and collaborating, and in higher education, so much of the work we do centers on collaborating. But I think in these times, we really need to think of co-leading and not just collaboration. And so what does that mean, right? I think about radical disability allyship, right, coined by Alice Wong. I think about how do we begin to move as an institution, right, towards a model where there's shared authorship of programs and of ideas and of the work, and we begin to do some culture shifting work within this UCB space, and thinking of ourselves as part of the larger community and the disability rights community. I think also one of the things that I think about is storytelling as a strategy. Right? How do we tell our stories, our lived experience as expertise? How do we move people, and how do we move policies and practices? We do it through our storytelling, right? I think a lot of the advocacy that happens is sharing those lived experience, especially students, graduates, movement leaders, and we have to keep telling those stories to influence our institutions, to guide inclusive policy, and to remind us who we're accountable to.
Now, if I can just quickly hop in, you reminded me. So yes, both from moving from this collaboration to co-leadership. I also think, again, the term that comes from Black liberation and anti-racism work of how do we move from allyship to co-conspiratorship, right? And how do we work with folks and say, yes, you are welcome into the community. We want to work with you as a co-conspirator, right? Not performative allyship, but really like let's get down and get some work done together. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's important to know that each of us, has a role to play in kind of disability leadership and disability justice as a whole. And it flows great into this next question about community investment is critical to our collective success. And when we talk about community investment, not just meaning monetary or financially amidst federal cuts and state deficits, we're talking about the people investment, the power of the people kind of in our collective success. How do you envision kind of the larger disability community supporting the success of each of your organizations in the years to come?
I went first last time.
Yeah, good. Go. Sure.
You go.
I can go. I think, first of all, I want to acknowledge that this is a hard question with everything changing and evolving. So I just want to acknowledge that. I think in the coming years, as we know, disabled people are going to be more impacted than ever, especially when it comes to resources, access to healthcare, benefits, housing. This is why, as I was saying earlier, I really think one of the critical things is to first recognize yourself as part of the disability community, continue to come forward into this work. And then one of the things that I've learned also is that we have opportunities to be aligned co-conspirators. And I think we get so enmeshed in the task at hand that it can be easy to forget that other people are doing similar work. And so I think it's also about really consciously making those alignments, becoming co-conspirators with other people doing similarly aligned work as part of community care. I also think that philanthropic support and donations will always be an important part of the work that we need to continue to do. But the way that we achieve that also is by showing folks what we do, the power that we have when we have an opportunity to come together in community.
I'll agree, Nicole, this was a hard question as well. And so I think Eric and Nicole have touched on a lot of what I wanted to share. So my points were really around supporting each other's initiatives and aligning aligning our values and our work and our action together, and about bringing our voices together, right? And again, telling our stories, bringing our voices together, because there's more power when we're together than when we're alone. And I think in these times, it's even more evident and more important. And I think with everything that's happening, people feel isolated. People kind of almost don't know which way to turn, which way to move when things happen. We have to remember that there's a whole community of people feeling the same way, right? So to be able to align in other movements, and there's that reciprocity that needs to happen, right? If we want other movements and other organizations to align and be our co-conspirators or co-lead with us, we also have to be in those spaces with them as well, right? Fighting their fight, they help us fight our fight, and then we fight the fight together. And yeah, I think that's all I'll share about that.
Then maybe I'll go ahead and hop in and say that I also read in this question a chance for us to go ahead and put the pitch for our organization. So where's my mark? Let's see. So go to sdaction.org, sdaction.org. We are a member-driven organization, right? And so we are only as strong as the folks who are getting involved, as the folks who are signing up, who are showing up, but showing up in different ways. I'll do a quick side anecdote. I was chatting with the executive director of the ILRC in San Francisco, Lana, and so much of emergency preparedness is around able-bodiedness. And one of the things they're doing is they have a ham radio program. And one of the things that has really been illuminating from that is for them to be able to empower folks who may not be physically able, but who could be the folks who have learned these skills with this radio set. And if there's an emergency, they're the one on the radio. And they're the ones that are connecting with the police department and saying, this is how many folks are in the building, this is where they're at. So I really think one of the joys of being in our communities is getting to be creative and getting to think about what showing up means, right? And so it doesn't mean that it has to be the person walking in a march, right? There's a lot of different ways that we all can contribute to the community. And that's one of the things that SDA really wants to build on. So again, please head to our website, sign up for our newsletter, come to one of our meetings, see something that it feels like it matches your interests, or maybe something that doesn't, and you can learn something new. We love educating. And then, being able to find the ways that people can feel that empowerment, can feel that agency. And especially, I think especially in times like these, where so much of our agency is being taken away from us and being replaced by fear and terror, that we really need to hold on to that. And we really need to be building that sense and being able to make sure that folks, not just, collectively, but also individually, are feeling like they have a way to participate, they have a way to contribute.
Thank you all so much. I feel like that was really helpful, at least for me, to know all of these different ways we can be supporting and also hold with each other the bit of ambiguity and unknown that still remains. And we have, at this point, some questions from folks that submitted when RSVPing, and we'll do a bit of live Q&A from folks on Zoom after that. So if folks on Zoom have anything they've been thinking about, feel free to populate it in the respective sections. But folks beforehand wanted to know, and feel free to respond when you feel like you have something to contribute. These were kind of just from the group at large. But are there any kind of coordination efforts currently happening with disability advocates for a synchronized push for protecting specific rights outlined in 504 or ADA, or how does that look in response to the work that you do? I'm assuming, Nicole, you might have something, but also for other folks too.
I'll just reinforce what I had mentioned earlier. One of our collaborative efforts that we've done recently is specifically around the protecting 504 effort. Again, I want to direct folks to our webpage, dredf.org/protect-504. One of the resources that you'll find on there's many resources. One of them is a community information session that we did several months ago, which was done in collaboration with several organizations. That's one example. We're also in community groups that are talking about protecting Medicaid. There's more information on our website there at dredf.org /hands-off-our-Medicaid. So please take a look. There are ways to get involved there. It is very important at Redif to be working in community and co-leading these efforts. And one of the things that we just have underway in this week is we brought someone on who is going to be helping us with collecting community stories around impact. So that's another way that the community can come together. Tell us your stories. Tell us what you're hearing. Contact us. We can use that in our efforts. We can't do anything if we don't know what the story is on the ground. And so we really need to hear from everyone, from all of you. So please contact us. That's another way that we collaborate, is by sharing everybody's stories with each other. I'll stop there for now.
Sharing stories is so valuable right now. I mean, I can speak for myself, but I'm sure many others in this room share the sentiment of I wouldn't be here without Section 504 and the ADA and all these laws that have just been so critical to just including all of us in the basic civil rights of our public institutions across the country. And this flows perfectly actually into our next question. Speaking about existential threats to civil rights and access for disabled people and disabled students at large. I mean, just the impact of dismantling the Department of Education. What do you think that would have on disabled students, both in public schools, but also in university and college systems? And Carmen, I'm looking at you for this too, to speak about kind of the impacts on higher education that might have.
Yeah, so I think the loss of federal protections and accountability is huge. Right. So what we're seeing is that the Department of Ed, so we know the Department of Ed enforces key civil rights laws, including Section 504, the Rehabilitation Act, and the ADA in education. And so without it, there's really no federal watchdog to ensure that disabled students receive equal access and protections from discrimination. So these are very real threats. And we know that access and the promise of access, even under 504 and the ADA, even though they exist, there are always barriers, right? And people with disabilities have the right to be able to file lawsuits, complaints, whatever they need to do to be able to gain that access. And it's unfortunate that that's what it takes oftentimes. But that's what's at stake for that, I think. Also, the collapse of IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, oversight in public schools is huge. So I was a special education advocate for 11 years when I was at Disability Rights California during my 16-year tenure there, and worked in a lot of communities of color, did a lot of advocacy for students with disabilities through their parents. And so there are some real inequities for children with disabilities in public schools. And so we know that there's a guarantee of a free, appropriate public education for kids in K through 12. But if the department disappears, then so does the enforcement mechanisms for individualized educational programs, their due process rights, and funding equity collapse. So especially in underserved communities, which are the most marginalized and oftentimes don't understand or have representation against large systems such as school districts. And I think in terms of threat to post-secondary access and success, programs like our TRIO SSSD program and vocational rehabilitation coordination and financial aid access all fall under the department's scopes. So their removal would leave disabled college students with fewer pathways to degree attainment and economic upward social mobility as well.
I would supplement that, if I might, by saying that also the education of parents who are supporting students with disabilities is going to be greatly impacted. DREDF works with parents, educating parents about their rights and responsibilities under IDEA who have never heard of that legislation before. There are indigenous communities in Northern California, for instance, who we work with, where if DREDF and organizations like ours don't have the support and the backing of the Department of Education, that work is going to be directly impacted. So it is a concerning rippling effect, certainly.
And thank you, Nicole, for reminding us about the parents' role, because the advocacy happens through the parents. And so like in my tenure at DRC, we did a lot of training to parents, right, in their native languages. We worked with farm workers and farm worker communities and different communities all over the state of California, because we understood that they needed to understand what their legal rights were as well as their responsibilities as parents, because we couldn't be there, the DREDF cannot be there for every single parent, every single person with a disability. And so providing them with those tools to empower them to self-advocate is critical, I think, especially in these times.
And one of the second to last ones I think we have is shown up there. This came from someone who definitely was feeling the weight of everything that was being shared and kind of reflecting the moment back, and curious if folks have any thoughts that you want to share on your perspective and outlook when it comes to the kind of coercion and institutionalization, particularly with folks who have psychosocial, mental, intellectual, and or developmental disabilities. We've had a pretty generalized conversation thus far, but kind of narrowing in at some of the folks that are definitely going to be feeling the hardest impacts, I'd say. And yeah, kind of an open conversation, recognizing the really harmful harms that come with all of this.
I'll hop in. I will first of all say not the expert on this subject, but I know this has been a concern and something that I know SDA has fought against in the past, and unfortunately is rearing its head again. And so this is one of the reasons why I will once again say, we're building power. We're fighting in particular right now against a particular onslaught of federal policies and attacks. But at least I know from the experience being in San Francisco, this is coming from our local lawmakers right now, and this is, unfortunately, I think people with disabilities get scapegoated for a number of other societal concerns, homelessness, violence, especially gun violence, right? And it's so unfortunate because, one, the data doesn't bear that out, right? It's not that people with disabilities are more likely to get a gun and shoot people, but when you have that one case study that you get on all the news channels, and then they can find, oh, that's the reason. It's not society that's terrible and that we live in America. It's, oh, somebody had, a developmental disability or a mental disability. And so then therefore we do this reactive, again, we're getting to this reactive versus proactive. We do this reactive thing where we're like, well, we must keep people safe, and therefore we need to, have institutionalization. We need to have public safety legislation that focuses on this as the solution. And it's just not, right? It's just not the solution. The solution is to deal with the underlying issue. The issue for homelessness isn't to criminalize it or to put folks in an institution. The issue is to give people homes. Like that's the solution. That's the solution there. So, I know it's something that we're watching really closely. I don't know as much about in the other Bay Area if there's other legislative efforts, but I know, especially with the recent election in San Francisco, that these are things that have been cropping up and that I know SDA has on our radar. At this point, there isn't too many very specific tangible things, but once there are, we will be out there, we will be rallying with our members and doing whatever we can to, recognize there is an underlying need, right? There is this need for safety that we all have, but really recognize that this is not the solution, right? This is not going to be what I think people hope is going to happen. There's plenty of data that shows this is not the way to do it.
At this point, we're going to go to some of the live questions that we've been getting, and they definitely overlap with some of the things we've already been talking about. Firstly, someone asks, there's a lot changing and moving. How is your organization pivoting and shifting advocacy based on those changes? And how can the broader community support with those efforts? Kind of touched on it a little bit throughout, but definitely important if folks want to share a little bit more.
Nicole speaking. What I'll say is, I said this in the beginning of the conversation, but we really are trying to make an attempt to pivot to be the most responsive to the things that are happening, while realizing that we are an organization that has the resources that it has. So one of the conversations that we've been having out of many is looking at our policy priorities and saying, okay, what does Retta think is the most critical thing for us to be putting our energy on right now? And we have, while keeping an eye on everything because we have to, we have chosen to really hone in on several efforts, most of which I've mentioned. We're really monitoring healthcare, protecting 504, education, housing, really those critical bedrocks. Transportation's another one. But I think in these challenging times, we really have to also be realistic about where can we put our energy, where can we have the most impact. Another conversation that we're having towards that end is where are the spaces where these conversations are already happening, and how can we join those conversations? There are some conversations I think that we can lead, and there are some conversations where we have the most power, as we've been saying, in joining those efforts. And so really looking at the resources that, in terms of what the community can do in response to that as well. First of all, take care of yourself. Choose where you have your own energy and where your passions are. And then once you know that, or have a solid sense of, yes, this issue is really important to me, I want to work on this, then look to our organizations or others to find out what's happening and where you can plug in, because there are a lot of efforts happening. And I think one of the biggest challenges, as I've been saying, is making sure that we all continue to come together so that we are more powerful together and not duplicative, and hopefully not counter each other's efforts. That's also really important, that we're making sure that we're aligned on a path towards true disability justice. That's what I'll say.
I think I'll add that at UCB, we are looking at what can we do, right, in these times. Trying to stay away from that kind of deficit model or scarcity mindset, and really kind of coming together. A lot of my partners and colleagues have departments that are at real risk for losing funding. So they've scaled back some of their efforts. So we were in a meeting today where we were talking about some of these efforts that have been scaled back. So now we're looking at alternatives. We're looking at it as an opportunity to get creative and figure out new ways to disseminate information and resources to students. And I think it requires a team of people, of creative people, to do that, right? And so it's kind of reaching out for that help and saying, hey, this is what's happening, what can we do? So it's not about, we can complain about it all day long and feel bad about it all day long, but in the end, what are we gonna do about it, right? Let's not just talk about it, let's be about it. And so we are looking for ways to really creative ways to figure out how to begin to still continue to serve students and do the important work that we're tasked to do here at UCB.
Yeah, Nicole, I resonate just with so much of what you said, especially as a new executive director. I think I'm just finishing month 6, as of all of us are new in the positions. I don't want to live in a scarcity mindset, but there are constraints, right? That's a reality, and fiscal constraints in particular, right? And you talked before about how to support organizations and philanthropic giving being such an important part of that. In a lot of places, money is drying up, right? Folks are just not giving as much as they used to. Understandably, we're in a really scary economy right now. Government funding has certainly been getting cut back. Grant funding has been getting cut back. So a lot of what I really see as my role as an executive director is how to help create structures that are going to support my staff, that's going to support the work we're doing, but also support them in making some of that prioritization decision making, right? To really support them in saying we can't do everything, and if we try to do everything, so-so, we're not going to succeed. If we can prioritize and focus and do a few things really, really well, and then find those organizations that are filling in some of those gaps, don't duplicate efforts. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. Again, on the card right here, we were just talking about, how are we getting plugged in with the city and city commissions? And I said, there's got to be an organization out there that's doing that. Right? Like, I don't think we need to invent how to do this and how to get our members involved, but let's go find the folks who are doing it. Let's go find the people and let's build that relationship. Let's build that connection. And so I think this goes back to that question about the future. I think that we all see about disability justice, this cooperation and co-leadership, right? I think it gets tied into that of when we aren't being separated into our own silos, which, let's be clear, in a lot of ways, institutionalized discrimination wants us to be, right? Mm-hmm. Institutionalized oppression wants us to each be operating on our own. When we actually have more of that communication and share resources and recognize, oh, you're really good at this advocacy, we're really good at this advocacy, let's combine together and focus on and plug, and really funnel energy into each other's work. I think that's how we really create change within a constrained environment, especially a financially constrained environment. Yeah.
And as we close out, I think we'll do one more from Zoom. If there's someone that has a question in the space, we'll have about an hour-ish after this where we'll have some mingling time. So don't feel like you're being ignored. We just want to make sure that folks on Zoom definitely get a chance. And the last one we actually have is, in brief, I think if that's okay with folks, tips you guys have for self-advocacy in and outside of education, recognizing, the various ways we're interacting with folks.
I think my tips would be to understand what your rights are, but also understand what your responsibilities are as well. Responsibility comes with having rights. And so know those, feel empowered, learn about what you need to learn about and what you want to learn about, what you need to know about any issue that is personal for you, that you need to advocate for yourself, for a family member, for a friend. And don't be afraid. I'm going to say, don't be afraid to speak truth to power. Don't be afraid when somebody tells you no to say why not, and then to pursue whatever you need to pursue, whether it is a grievance, whether it is any kind of process that you need to appeal. I would say, do not be afraid.
I would plus one to all of those things, and I would add also be as specific as you can. And so line the problem, speak the truth, and be very specific. I think sometimes one of the things that we can do in advocacy that doesn't work as well is we say things like, well, this is going to harm the rights of disabled people. But a statement like that is so broad that it's hard for the legislators and the lawmakers and the folks that really need to listen to understand. So that's why I think we've put such an emphasis on telling the specific stories and what is your specific end goal of that thing that you are the most passionate about. And then remember that you're not in this alone. There are a lot of people who want to advocate. I think there are fewer people who feel prepared to come forward. And so it's about being prepared, being specific, finding your allies and your co-conspirators, and then moving forward with a very specific request. Most of the time, I find when you're very specific, it's a lot harder to knock it down and for people to say no, because they need to give you a reason for that. So ask why and keep going.
Can I give a plus one squared, plus one, plus one, plus one, plus one? Yeah, all of that. And I think what I'll say is in my life before this, I was a English and composition professor at City College of San Francisco. And so this is literally what I taught is, how to make a good argument how to advocate for your cause. And so what I would say of the one, go take a class. Don't be afraid of your English 101 class. Like there's so much to actually learn from that. But then two, one of the things I taught my students was about ethos, pathos, and logos, and that you really need a combination of all of those: authority, emotion, and logic. And I think we, especially in a white supremacist society, overvalue logic and think that if we just have enough numbers, if we just have enough figures, then we can convince folks. And so then this goes back to something we've all been saying the whole time, is storytelling. Never underestimate the value of that emotion, of that storytelling, of sharing your story, sharing your truth, and knowing that you have the authority in sharing that, right? And that you have your lived experience, and connect it to all these things, right? Go ahead and connect it to the numbers, connect it to the specific ask. But I've seen, especially politically, so many things shift when folks are willing to share their story and really become adept at connecting that to the larger issue. And then also then as part of that is find the other folks who either resonate with that story or support you and can hold you up and put your story out there in the forefront. I think that is the key for really successful self-advocacy. Absolutely.
Yeah. Each of those tips are extremely valuable for the members of our community. And as we wrap up this panel, I'd like to thank each and every one of you again, as well as our audience members. But if there was a final message or a call to action for our community, what would you have for them during these extraordinary times?
I'm gonna steal a little bit of what you said, Nicole, and hop in and say, take a deep breath, exhale, sustain yourself, and then find your allies, find your co-conspirators, and get to work.
I would say that, and identify as disabled people. Continue to be proud to be disabled, even though the climate is not good. Continue to share the stories with pride.
So I'm going to plus one square now with what Nicole and Eric shared. And I think I just reiterate what I said before, is don't be afraid. I think that there are those out there who want us to be afraid. There are those out there who want us to silence our voice, for us to self-silence. And our voices are powerful. And so I'm going to say again, speak truth to power. Don't be afraid, and keep going, because things will get better. And I think we have to come together and also remember why we are doing what we are doing and why this work is so important, to keep us centered and to keep going.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for joining us today as we work towards the future of collective liberation for our communities. It's so important for us to meet together, collectively together, to do this and to ensure that future. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending on Zoom as well, too. Yes, some shakes, some hands. We also have a feedback form on the next slide. Would love for you to fill out to share more about how we can continue the conversation moving forward with each of us to move towards that bright future, hopefully. Thank you all.
Thank you.